White wine shows itself that it can be aged if it has a really lovely structure, and by that I mean it has freshness. You're going to notice, I hate the word, but it's acidity. You're going to notice acidity. That's a backbone that stays with the wine, and then around that it will have a great structure of fruit, and you'll find then that a number of those wines have super longevity, and they're often wines that we drink fresh, straight off the vintage, but actually you should keep them and you'll find that they develop beautifully. An age-worthy white starts with selection in the vineyard. You begin to know, you learn how your vineyard behaves, how the grapes behave. You very quickly come to identify what makes a great vineyard in terms of producing a wine that's going to last. So if we think of somewhere like Rioja, which certainly has been making some very special white Riojas that really last, then they know their vineyards, they can name their vineyards, and then they know when they bring the wine into the winery a particular process of winemaking. Very often that involves aging in fine barrels. The barrel selection is super important, and then a lot of bottle aging too. There's two I think probably the two most famous aged white wines in Spain. Both come from Rioja. Obviously there's Castillo y Gall from Marqués de Murrieta, and then there's the López de Heredia, which has extraordinary age as well. And you wouldn't expect these wines to have the freshness they have. So they look like mature wines, the colour is developed. They don't smell like fruit because they've gone into that tertiary stage of maturity, but in the mouth, that acidity I mentioned, the freshness jumps forward and you have a super youthful style. So there's something about those vineyards in Rioja from those soils which make super ageable wines. Castillo y Gall obviously is particularly well known. That white is particularly famous because it got 100 Parker points. It came to the top of the trees, and very deservedly. It's a wine that has exceptional qualities. These are qualities of complexity, something that when you smell it, the adjectives come rushing to your mind about how this wine might taste. In the mouth, it arrives slowly and then goes on developing and then lasts. And I think one of those things about white wine that has ageability, such as that one, is that it keeps on going. You can practically time its timing in your mouth. There's a new white wine coming from Ramon Bilbao, which is very interesting in this respect. It comes from the far eastern part of Rioja, not really an area that's too much talked about, Cuzcurita, quite into the mountains, into a cooler region. And they've got there two very exciting to me grape varieties. One of them is probably the most historic grape variety in Rioja, Maturana, which it's only in small quantities, but it's gradually being recuperated. And the other one is a mutation, which was found not so long ago, which is Tempranillo Blanco. Tempranillo Blanco is a very interesting case. We have this grape variety which was found by a farmer, a very observant farmer. He found a white bunch on a red vine, quite extraordinary thing. And he did the good thing, took it off to the experimental labs who have developed it, grown it on, taken cuttings. And from that now we have really a lot of vines. But what's interesting about this is clearly it's a new variety. But the thing that's special about it, I think, is that it is Tempranillo. So we know Tempranillo. It's Spain's great red variety. It is Rioja's red variety. And how now we have something which shares the same name and one that we all understand and is of the same family. So this is something that's really growing in Rioja. We're going to be seeing a lot more of it over the coming decade. Then you match it with Maturana Blanca. Now Maturana Blanca was known as Ribadavia in the 17th century. We have, it may have gone back earlier than that, but certainly that's what we know about its presence in Rioja. And then it obviously went on being used very, very widely, but it then disappeared. And there was a very small amount left, and indeed it wasn't even on the register. So it's only just come back in in the 21st century. It's only just come back on the register of permitted grape varieties, and we have really a very small quantity of it in Rioja, but thankfully Ramon Bilbao is working with it, and I should be very excited to see how that develops again. The real local grape variety, white grape variety, coming back into its own. I'm very interested in what's happening in Ramon Bilbao's new project in Rueda. That's obviously particularly the Verdejo grape variety, although they have Sauvignon Blanc too. Not just because they're doing it, but because of, very typical of the company, there's a lot of experimentation going on. So I've recently tasted the one that's fermented in stainless steel, the one that's fermented in concrete, and concrete eggs come into it, and then also obviously there's oak. And to have that chance, for myself as a wine writer, it's a super exciting thing to do. But actually for a consumer, it's equally interesting because they give very different styles. One is it's all about fruit. Another one is all about texture. And what you end up doing is, you blend those to create something even more interesting. And then from that also they're working with the lees. Now these are the dead yeasts, and you'd think that dead yeast wouldn't really contribute anything very exciting to a wine. You want to have a clean wine, but actually if you keep a wine on its lees for 3 months, 6 months, it begins to give a lovely creamy character to the wine. So on the one hand you have Verdejo as a variety with super fruit, and then you have this freshness as well, and then with the lees, as in their limited edition, we have that lovely creaminess. So I think they're starting really well, but I think the potential is very good. So Albarino is a great variety for Rías Baixas. It's the one that you have with seafood and shellfish. But it's a great variety. We drink young, but it's also supremely good for aging if you know how to manage it. And Paula Fandinho, who's the winemaker at Mar de Frades, she's a great experimenter. So she's very good at making lovely fresh white wine that comes in its blue bottle, but she also has single vineyard wine and lots of experimentation. So again, she's found that she can work really well with the lees, with these dead yeasts, or the dying yeasts, which give a really superb creamy texture, just as you would find in Burgundy. The same technique. And aging a wine on lees means you can keep it longer, and it's something that we can keep in our cellars longer. Not that I find a wine like that is something I can keep in my cellar too long, but it's really important now to see that there are leaders in Rías Baixas moving away from just a quickly made Albarino into something that is really a wine for laying down. So Spain has really many more white wines for aging, for cellaring than you might think. I mean, for me as a great fan of sherry, I have to say there's a white grape variety which has wines that you can enjoy, that are really aged but again have this lovely freshness. But we can also think about a wine which is the epitome of youth, and that's Cava. But actually Cava now, we're beginning to get Cava with 6 years aging, 10 years aging. We're getting great complexity out of those wines, great insights. I can think too in one of the great varieties for that region is Xarel·lo. Xarel·lo was a wine we learn about in textbooks, but actually now it's beginning to be made into a table wine. And the thing about it, which is so important for any wine for aging, is it has great acid structure. So it has that punchiness which tells you that it's really going to last, it's really going to age well. You can, wherever you travel across Spain, you'll be surprised. Don't always expect them to be young wines. The white wines are having, I think, a transformation. I definitely think white wine in Spain is having a moment. It has been for so much of my time enjoying and drinking wine in Spain. It's been red wine, or red wine and sherry perhaps. But now we're recognizing and learning to love. Albarino was the leader, first with Albarino. Then we had Verdejo from Rueda was something else that was only, was typical of Spain, only came from Spain. Garnacha Blanca has taken longer to come through, a wine which maybe doesn't have so much acidity, but it has terrific texture, terrific structure. So that's something which is really becoming good. And the other thing that's interesting is that Bura also known as a Macabeo, is the white grape of historic white grape of Rioja. And there have been, I have to say, an awful lot of really boring viewers, but people are learning now through the right kind of viticulture, understanding where to plant and how to plant, just what Bura can be about. So I'm super excited by what's happening with that. And now, of course, we've got people reviving newer, forgotten varieties. Maturana Blanca coming in to give excitement to the blending. So I think the future is very, very exciting for Spanish wines. If you're going to be exploring Spanish wines, then the key thing about Spanish white wines is you need to be adventurous. If you go through the education system, it very easily categorises white wines in particular ways, and I think very often the guides and the textbooks are actually behind the times. But if you go out there, you go and sit in the bars or you order in the wines, you'll find that there's something really exciting happening in Spain at the moment. There's a new generation of winemakers who are really committed to understanding the ground that their grapes grow in and how best to grow these grapes. And the result is we're getting a whole range of diverse wines. So I think that the thing about Spanish white wine now is to get out there and start drinking it.